All right. So we are about to start. My name is Carlos Monroy. I'm from Rice University, and this is the session entitled Challenges. So I will start off by a survey. How many of you have gotten lost in Leuven since you came here? Yay! Speaking about challenges. So I think that we've been going through several talks about learning analytics, and we have a really wide range of papers for this session. So we have presenters from Michigan, we have people from South Africa, and for a collaboration in Germany and Greece. So I think it's going to be an exciting discussion. Rules, nobody likes rules, but you have to comply with them. So 20 minutes, I think it's 50 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes for discussion. So the first group is from Michigan, and it's issues, challenges, and lessons learned when scaling up a learning analytics intervention.
Hi, so my name is Stephen Aguilar. I'll be presenting with Steve Lonn, and this is work that's come out of the use lab working with Stephanie Teasley and colleagues. So there are 3 authors on this paper, but it's really just, it's a big project that has a lot of different stakeholders. So this project really gets born out of whenever there's a new kind of learning analytics intervention that gets piloted, the idea is to scale it up. So we're going to kind of be using this metaphor that we're on the road to scale, because the idea is you want it institution-wide so all the stakeholders that are involved can actually leverage this data. So before you actually get to scale, you actually have to construct the road that helps you get there. And one of our partners, so the partner that we've been working with is the MSTEM Academy. The MSTEM Academy their goal is to help at-risk students basically succeed. So they invite about 140 different students that they pre-identify based off of demographic variables, ACT scores, so our standardized admission scores, and a number of other factors that they've determined kind of might put these students at risk for not finishing kind of the engineering requirements. The problem is that advisors were noticing that they couldn't help until it was too late, so until a student actually failed a course or had to take an incomplete in the course. So in order to address this problem, we basically wanted to design an early warning system for advisors so they had the data that was necessary in order to kind of help them make informed decisions and really facilitate a conversation with the student before it was a little too late. Because it's not as useful to have a conversation with the student who's failed than to have a conversation with the student who's failing, and then you could kind of get them the resources that they need. So originally, when this started, we took data from Sakai, and we just kind of hand cranked it out in Excel. So this was thankfully work that happened before I was in the use lab, but there were a couple of graduate students who basically just pulled all the data from Sakai and just massaged it and really made it into manageable reports so that advisors could then see how their students were doing on any given assignment. So the idea was our iteration of Sakai, we call it C tools, and they basically took all the assignment data, and as long as instructors were actively using the gradebook function, there would be enough data to pull from to start giving our advisors a sense of how students were doing in their courses. And this worked pretty well for the first year, but it was really labor intensive. Having 2 full-time graduate students kind of do this project was about 10 hours. We gave them a weekly report, and it just took way too much time. So we wanted to obviously scale this up and automate some of these processes. When we started that project, we called it Student Explorer. And the idea being that we really wanted to not give answers to advisors. We wanted to give them data that they could then explore with their students. So the idea being that the advisor is going to just have a conversation with the student that's grounded on data as opposed to something else like how they're feeling a student is doing or something like that. But in order to kind of do this, we asked ourselves, how do we actually scale this sort of an intervention? And this is kind of when we hit kind of a crossing, a railroad crossing, where so we're an academic unit, and in order to kind of do this well, we had to do this, we really want to work with our partners over at ITS, who are also an academic unit, but with business leaning. So they kind of work and think a little bit differently than we do, in the sense of always wanting to, in the sense of just having, we had to really plug into their workflow and respect the fact that they had multiple projects that they had to manage and necessarily couldn't always, like they couldn't give us 100% of their attention, obviously, because they're in charge of ITS for the entire institution. So in order to do this, when we talked to them, we were at a point where we really just kind of wanted to, rather than build something from the ground up, we wanted to kind of hitchhike. We wanted to take an existing structure, a business intelligence and business objects specifically, and we wanted to just kind of hitchhike on that and try to pilot that just with our M-STEM coaches and see how that worked. So that way we would leverage resources that the institution already had and kind of just give that a shot. This had some challenges, though, and that's what Steve's going to talk about.
All right, so business objects is a business intelligence tool. So there's a whole suite of business intelligence tools that are used for reporting in many higher education institutions, and so that's what we were leveraging in this case. So the first thing that happened is that we found some usability gaps between what we had in our previous Excel version versus what we experienced in this new version of business objects when we went online. And so what you see here is, so this is it looks very similar, right? So this is, it's basically a nice replication of our, the Excel function. And actually, we actually got some new functionality when we first went online into the system. And what we were able to do is, before, these kind of like all the prior history was static, and you only were able to kind of see the current view. And with this, they were able to take a snapshot every week, and so you could go back and see, well, what caused that 69%? Why was the student red there, and now they're okay? So you're able to actually click on that and see that current status back then, which is really helpful. But we also experienced some problems. So one problem is that when in the Excel version, let me go back here one step. So in the old Excel version, you clicked on the most current view, or you clicked on over here, and it actually replaced the window, and it was kind of nice. And you clicked back, it was pretty intuitive. But just the constraints of the business object system, every time you clicked on a student, it opened a new tab. And you can see on top of there, I have a few tabs. Let me explain, I can highlight that even more. There's a lot of tabs. So it's quickly problematic for an advisor as they keep clicking on different students. Maybe the 5 or 6 students they have appointments with that day. They can quickly have problems of being able to, which tab am I in? Which student am I talking about? If I'm actually showing this to a student, what do I do? So that was a challenge. Another usability challenge was so it's really hard to see them. That's why I blew them up. So when you're it's a paged view, because there's something like by the time we're in scale of M-STEM, we're talking about something around 500 students. So there's several pages of this, but when you scroll down, it's hard to see what page you're on, and then there's actually only one way to page, and that's that little thing right there. So let me blow that up again. So that's the paging view. So it's really difficult to see kind of like where do I page and what do I do, which is another gap. So we also had some calculation gaps. Okay, so what do I mean by calculation gap? There's lots of nuance and edge cases when grades are involved, because grades, as many of us know, are messy. So this is one example. This is a large chemistry class, and you can see there's a lot of blanks here, right? So this student is actually in section 100, but it's a shared class. So the actual LMS site that we're involved with has 4 sections of like 200 students each, big class. So what was happening initially is they would, and what we did in Excel is we were able to kind of massage this by hand, and one of our grad students had a whole algorithm kind of design that used like a really long Excel formula, and it worked. But when we went into the automated extract and transform and load process, they couldn't necessarily do that by hand. So they had to basically say, okay, if it's a blank, we actually don't count it as a 0. We'll just count it, we'll count it as a null value. So the instructor now has to actually physically put in a 0 if they mean 0 in other classes. And the other problem is that there's functionality in the grade book, because it has lots of interesting tidbits in it, where you can actually have an assignment as counted, but then not necessarily count towards the final grade. So a lot of instructors might use something like they might use attendance. So they might actually count attendance in the LMS for a smaller class, but those don't actually count towards the grade. So but those are really helpful for advisors to know, are you even coming to class? Are you having some effort? So we were able to kind of flag those as no, which isn't the most intuitive, and you still kind of have to scroll. You can't sort by it, but at least it's there. There are also some access gaps. So to get into the system, you have to have special access not only to the database, but then you also have to authenticate using what we call two-factor authentication. It's this little code, this little dongle thing that we leave in our desks or strapped in our backpacks. So, and a lot of the advisors didn't necessarily have those in their prior work, so we had to get them access. It got problematic. And then we were also delivering the thing within an iframe in the LMS to make it a little easier, so they didn't have to navigate there. But the iframe didn't necessarily like us, so from time to time we got an invalid session, which is problematic when you're trying to advise students. So that was a little tricky. There's also some performance gaps. I mean that is so when they actually have an eye towards scale when we worked at the IT organization. So we were only pulling the data we actually needed for the individual courses students enrolled in. They said, well, eventually we're going to want scale, so we're going to pull everything. So on the day they pulled everything, it kind of crashed the LMS. So not so good when 12,000 people are online and oops. So it's really important to also remember to load test and do the things that we don't necessarily know how to do or have the skill to do in our little research unit. There's also automation gaps. So this is the advisor and student cohort data is still manually massaged. So we have to send them a little CSV file every 6 to 12 months to actually say, like, here's all the advisors, here's the cohort, here's all the students in that cohort. And it'd be really helpful if that was actually automated within the student data warehouse so we can actually work on that. So where have we gone? We're actually doing an alternate route. So while business objects was very helpful and got us quite a way there, it didn't get us all the way there. So we've actually partnered with another organization on campus, a slightly different set of students, and we're going to actually be able to deliver the data using very similar UI with some additional tweaks because we've done some research in the year since then using more students. What's helpful with that is that we're actually going to leverage the existing system that about 75% of advisors use on campus, which is very helpful. And we're able to do that because IT had an eye towards this, and so we're able to use the infrastructure they built and the database they built. So the ETL process is still the same. It just gets loaded into a different place instead of business objects. So that's helpful. So here's a quick summary. I'm not going to go. So this is just a quick summary. This is it, the replication of the table in the paper, where this is a summary of our gaps and some of the possible solutions. This is not exhaustive. There might be additional kind of roadblocks or things that you experience in your context. But we're thinking that many of these are generalizable and might be other things that people might encounter. And hopefully, we've gone through the pain once, and hopefully you don't have to. So the idea is hopefully lessons from our road will apply for lessons for your road, as we can all go to scale together. Quick acknowledgements for our team. So these are a bunch of the students, some of whom have moved on, but we'll still talk to them, as well as our partners in MSTEM, and then the new folks we're partnering with in the LSA academic file area. These are our contacts, and the slides again are available up here in SlideShare. I think we have some time for questions. Chris. Yeah.
The details of the dashboard itself was a presentation we made last year at LAK. So if you're curious about what some of those visualizations were about up there, I'm sorry, you can go back and look at last year's paper to fill in some of the details on that. But Chris had a question.
Yeah, this is very good, and I think it's very important for us to talk about how we take academic work we create and roll it out institution-wide, because we are the primary consumers of this. And we've had similar
producers.
Well, both, right? The academic labs are producing, and the institution is consuming. And so one of the challenges that we've had when doing this kind of thing, and I think I would like you to respond if possible, is that our IT organization expects that our research lab stuff is, kind of crappy and maybe doesn't work fully and isn't load balanced, et cetera. And so they kind of poo-poo it often a lot that way. But then they actually hire full-time people to deal with vendors where the vended solutions are as bad or worse in many cases because they're not specific for our organization. And so did you find that when you approached your IT organization to bring your research results and really make them institutional wide, did you feel, how did they look upon this? Was it painful? Did they say, let's just buy Blackboard solution? Or?
We actually had the opposite situation. So we had this and we're implementing it. And it was getting pretty high visibility on campus. Deans were seeing it and other people were seeing it. And at the same time, our provost got very interested in analytics and said, we got to get us some of that, and told our IT organization, go do an analytics project. That's the only direction they gave to the IT department. And so they came to us and said, we have to do an analytics project, and I hear you guys have something. So we said, yeah, and we're tired of cranking all this data behind the scenes, and the two data monkeys, as they called themselves, the two grad students were defending their thesis and moving on to real jobs. So we happily threw it over the fence to our IT organization. So what we encountered there was actually the opposite problem, is then they were used to dealing with canned packages. And so when the system didn't do things and we came back to them and said, why is it doing this? This is a problem, or why not? And they would say, it wasn't in the code, or it wasn't, we hadn't defined it. And we said, we already did you a favor, right? We already handed this over to you. Figure out the details. Don't expect our system that isn't intended to be initially in wide production to meet your requirements. So go figure that stuff out. More questions? Are we over time? Where's our session? I think we have time for Till someone kicks us off. You said you were going to be mean. You did say mean. Are we done?
Mean.
No, you didn't say mean. Okay, sorry.
I have a question. So have you disseminated this with, so I saw you have a STEM program. What is the feedback that you have received from the instructors about now I guess that they have this data available with this kind of new...
The instructors don't have the data, the academic advisors do. And we did that very intentionally because this isn't really a particularly intelligent system from the sense of there's no intelligence embedded in the system other than the algorithms and stuff that identify when the students are in trouble, which is pretty smart, but not the kind of... We trust the advisors to have the intelligence to tell the students, given the problems I can see you're having as displayed in the dashboard, here are resources on campus, here are things we think we can do, here are things that we can connect you up with. So the advisors know how the student's doing in a class because they control their own grade book. But what they don't necessarily know is what some of the things, the dashboards other people in our community are developing that tell instructors, did the student go to class, did they read the resources, and so forth. So one of the ways we'd like to scale this up is a dashboard for instructors. But honestly, at our academic institutions, when we've shown this to instructors, some of them just said, I don't need that. I know what grade they're getting. Period. So, we have to change some of that thinking, and I think we're the kind of people who are poised to do that.
Thank you. One more question?
Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.